This is a proposal to sort of get into the PHP language, but it applies to sort of all programming languages. It's really just a simple check to see sort of distinguishing between safe strings, as in things which you have defined in your code, things that you have defined yourself, versus unsafe strings, which could have come from the user. It could come from anywhere, you just don't know. So the unsafe stuff is dangerous and we should never trust it. And then the stuff you defined yourself is safe. The reason we're doing this is, well, we've got the OWASP top 10 and, well, injection has been like the most severe for, I hate to think how long. You look at the CVEs, this is just XSS, cross-site scripting, thousands of those, thousands of SQL injection ones, and even common projects like WordPress, every time they're sort of releasing loads of fixes for mistakes which have been made. So that's kind of what we're trying to avoid. Now, I've been trying to find out how we can avoid this problem for a long time. Then we came across a talk by Christoph Kern, who works at Google, who's come across, who expressed this idea of being able to distinguish the two types of variables. And there's a talk there, I've got the link on the slide, I'll show it later, where he gives an hour's talk on how this could be done in Google. And it's something they have done in Google. They did it in Go, and I'll quickly come back to that later. But the main point of the talk was really saying that developer education doesn't solve the problem. We've got thousands of developers in the world, probably even millions. Trying to teach all clearly failed. We've been trying to teach programmers for some time because we keep making, and these bugs are hard to find after the fact. Because there's just variables flying all over the place, basically. We've got manual testing, got automated testing, static analysis, human code reviews, and yes, they find some of the bugs, but they certainly don't find all of them. That's what. This is just a very simple example of how we come up. I'm just listing a one, and you can sort of. Oh, good. Yep. Sorry. Okay. Now I've been asked to put in a drop-down menu to sort of filter the different types. So you've got like some advanced members, and this is something that could be done in Docker, a database abstraction, where specify a different type. This is you're sort of putting in a set parameter, which is actually a surprising number of keystrokes you now need to make. Whereas what your developer to do, and my internet's stable again, is they'll do this, which is basically taking that very unsafe value from the URL. And now from the developer's point of view, it works. It actually seems to be okay. Of course, you as a user or an attacker can easily just change that to be something else. So what we're trying to do is sort of say, look, this is safe, this bit, but safe, well, you've got basically a where clause, which has now got an SQL injection vulnerability. Now this is Doctrine's DQL. This is their SQL-like syntax, and you have the similar sort of thing where they're being affected by untrusted user data. Here's a different ORM, Propel, where you build up a where clause. You're supposed to put in type equals question mark and then put in a second parameter to say, well, there's what you provide in. But it's so easy to do it this way because the developer change it to variable. another one, Red Bean PHP. So that's just 3 ORMs I found off very quickly. But it's not just SQL. You've got templating engines for HTML. So you create a template, and the idea is you're supposed to put in placeholders, and then when you go to render it, you provide it with variables to fill it. But this is a lot more complicated than the wrong way of doing it, where they've, the developer's just gone, oh, I want to print a name, so I just print it in. And this is what would happen on a browser if you could put that into the query string. It just gets printed out because the templating engine has no idea of what's gone. It's just being told this is the trusted HTML. Sorry. Okay. Then you got the safe string a little in terms of shell commands, because they are still a string. And if you were to take in a value from there, it's also not good. So how do we solve this? Well, we already have a solution which you can install today, and it requires you to actually install it, and it requires you to configure it and use it. And this package is a little bit buggy as well, but the basic principle is there, and it's called Taint Checking. And the idea is that every variable is tracked. So you've got the prefix of hi, which is untainted. And then in this case, we're taking that and concatenating with another thing. And yeah, that's great. We're all happy. Now we take a name, which is, that one is tainted. We've got the untainted variable, and then we combine the two together. And then the tainting checking system goes, no, not happy with that. So when you go to print it, it'll say, no, I'm not having that. And you go, ah, brilliant, okay. Now this is where I diverge, because this is where things start to go wrong. Taint checking allows, so as soon as you, oh, it's now safe, and safe, because the escaping function has been run. Unfortunately, you take these two tainted variables and you put them in here, and you pass them through the untaint function, and well, in theory it should be safe, but what happens if your URL had been a JavaScript URL? It has been through HTML encoding, but because it's a link, as soon as the person, the target, the victim, clicks on that link, they're now going to be running some JavaScript, and you've got yourself a cross-site scripting vulnerability, even though it has passed the taint checking process, which, I like as a principle, but there is a flaw here. And by flaw, I mean there's quite a few. So this time we're going to just take the ID from the URL. We're going to pass it through the MySQL escape string function, which in theory would untaint it, and so say make it safe. But unfortunately, I'm missing quotes around this, because in MySQLi, you actually need to quote your values as well, which if you passed in the string ID, it becomes where ID equals ID, and you've got yourself a problem. Likewise, with this one, you've got the tainted URL coming from user, pass it through, in theory safe, but no, again, it's not been quoted. So you could pass in /, which would be for the home page, and then you put in an attribute of on error, and then you put in your evil JavaScript. That passes HTML encoding, but now that the on error handler, which has been defined by the encoding approach, doesn't exactly work. Then there's also character encoding, because there's Latin, there's the ISO standards, there's UTF-8. Escaping can often have and it would quite frequently get confused because people encoding. It's a long time ago now. We fortunately moved on, but escaping, it fails with that. And you can actually see it in some of the libraries. So PDO is a database abstraction layer, and it will simply sort of say, well, the quote function is only theoretically safe. Even they know that you know, that it's only in theory safe, but not real. This is why we use parameterized queries. Now, wait a minute, we've got more. Sorry, no, my computer's completely broken. I can't use my mouse. Okay, so static analysis. This is one way of dealing with it. And the problem is that the injection problems specifically are rarely covered by static analysis. You still do it, you know, it has its uses, but it's very hard to follow a variable from source to sink in static analysis. You need these things to be running at runtime. And you shouldn't be expecting every program in the world to do it. You know, most programmers are just simply going, I'm going to write a script, I'll upload it, I'm done. You know, we're thinking more about the developers who are programming for the first time rather than the more experienced programmers. Okay, so static analysis. I just pulled up two ones in PHP. I've forgotten which one this is. PHP Stan. Because it's not actually doing any analysis. The called Psalm. Now I had to make a little change here to explicitly state that it's a string. That's just to get through the type checking, but it's not. Hello?
Could I break in, Craig?
Okay, John.
Yeah, sorry. It's just
of course.
Yeah, your audio's dropping out a bit. So, are you able? Maybe is it the microphone swinging? If you can make sure your mic's.
Question.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead.
Into a non. So,
it's just if it's a dangling microphone, maybe it needs to be nearer.
If I use that.
Well, we're getting most of what you say, but sometimes we're getting quite long dropouts.
Yeah, so not. Okay. Go and see how it goes, John.
Yeah, absolutely. Please carry on, Craig. Yes, we can get most of it for sure. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so static analysis. So this is Psalm. I had to change it to sort of say it's a string, but ultimately it was still fine with it. Now, Psalm does have a taint analysis thing, which uses that taint checking style of thing, but it runs on a static analysis. It's not run at runtime, but it happens by looking at the code. Unfortunately, it's not really complete. Now, in this case, it's because it was only looking for about 5 different functions. But I'm not actually using that function myself. But it's very clearly not a complete solution. They unsafe function. So, no. But yeah, so within start, we should with it can be attacker controlled, and we need to way itself can do it. And whatever it's passed into it, you'll be checked to see if it's something that's defined by the programmer. So in this case, obviously it was true. It follows along the variable. So in this case, it's also true. Good. If you can now concatenate it, also fine. But as soon as you bring in something else, as soon as you combine something that's not a literal, it rejects it, saying, I'm not happy with this, I'm giving up. Even if you pass it through an escaping function, it's not going to happen. It's not going to take it at all, because escaping is dead to me now. That's it now. And yeah, so it's just a note to myself to sort of say it's not the same as taint checking because of the escaping is just not accepted. Even if you pass it through a function, it should not be considered the literal anymore. So if you were to do it through str to upper, which is a simple way of just uppercasing it, that's enough for it to say, no, I'm not having that anymore, because it's been modified. We don't know how it's been modified. It could be modified in all sorts of ways. We're not having that either. Again, this is another example with the escaping. No, not at all. The only way of doing this is to use parameters. You are keeping the two things separate. You've got your SQL string, which has been built up from safe literals, and your parameters, which are taken separately and always kept separate. So your user data goes in as a separate thing. So when we go back to that query builder example that I had at the beginning with the sort of the very simple listing of members, this is how which one was it? This is Doctrine. This is how Doctrine could protect itself against it by looking at the where clause and saying the thing that needs to come into this function is a literal. It has to be safe. If not, I'm going to throw an exception and I'm not going to go any further. And it means that as soon as the developer does something wrong, it's going to reject it. And the developer knows straight away that they can't go any further. Same with a templating engine with HTML. This would be fine. It would, in their create template method, they would do a very simple check at the beginning. And as soon as it was given something that's not a literal, it would reject it. For backwards compatibility reasons, because it's not here today, you could do this by sort of checking to see if the function exists before doing it. And you could also start by just raising notices to begin with. So rather than actually throw an exception and sort of going, we're not going to run anything, we're just going to start logging it to begin with, so that the projects have time to find all those problems, correct all those notices before they enable like the more stricter version, which would actually completely block it. So start off with notices logging and then go to more later. Or there's another version where you just sort of create your own as literal, so that if it, for the older versions of PHP, you just say everything's fine because you can't tell. But for the newer versions of PHP, which would have this, would be able to check it. So the discussions I've had with other developers, the one that comes up quite frequently is with SQL, you can't pass in table names and field names as parameters. It doesn't like that. But there is a way of doing that, which would actually is completely safe. So this is an example where I've listed all the fields that this query could be ordered by. And I've created a list. It's otherwise known as an allow list. And I'm just simply saying, these are the fields you are allowed to sort by. In this case, I'm taking the sort value from the query string. If the query string hasn't got it defined, it will default to created. That's what the double question mark is for. It's basically saying, if the get thing isn't set, then we use created. I then search through that array to find the word that has been written in it. If it fails, if it doesn't find it, it would return false, which is kind of 0. So when we come to that last line, it's building up the order by string, the safe literal, and then it goes to that fields array, and it will pull up either the index of the one that's being found or name, because it's 0. It's been false. It's the first one on there. And therefore, you've now managed to combine 2 literals together, and you've used information from the user to define how the thing will be sorted. And it means that at no point has a value that the user has written gone into the SQL string. So that's probably the biggest one. The one that's sometimes raised is the wherein clause. because you now have an undefined number of parameters. The idea is you're saying to the database, give me all the records where the ID is, and you give them a list. In this case, I'm giving them 3 numbers, but it could be 5 or 10 or whatever. And this is how I've seen it being done before, where the person takes the load of IDs and they implode it. This is not good because you're not using escaping, and even if you were, it gets a bit messy. So the way around this, it's a little bit more complicated, and generally speaking, you'll be using a database abstraction, so you don't have to see this yourself. But what you do is you count how many IDs you have, you fill an array of question marks, and you implode them together with commas, and you now have a parameterized query, which again has not taken user input. The user input continues to be provided to the database as parameters, so it can keep the 2 separate. And that's the big 2 question marks which can be dealt with. We talked about other implementations. Google developing the Go, they've got 2 things in their libraries, the Go Safe Web and Go Safe HTML. In Go, they don't have anything that works at runtime, so theirs is a little bit more restrictive. But what they can do is, because there's a compiled language, they can say, what is passed in must be a compile time string. So they use it through a query builder, basically an object that keeps on taking an append method. And those appends should only ever be provided with compile time strings, or literals or constants. And it means that they're building up the SQL string in the builder like that. The problem with this one is it doesn't work with the wherein clause, with the undefined number of question marks, but they can build a query builder that handles that. It's just they haven't done that yet. And in other languages, JavaScript might get it, which would be really embarrassing if JavaScript managed to get here before everyone else. In the TC39 group, they're looking at new stuff that will be coming into JavaScript in the future. They've got a nice little project, which in summary is distinguishing strings from a trusted developer from strings that may be attacker controlled, which is the same thing as what I'm sort of hoping for. Okay, so the actual concerns that are raised, which are still very much a question mark, is the performance one. If you have this thing constantly running, how much of an impact is it going to have on the speed of your code? If it's going to slow everything down, it's not going to get anywhere. So it might be the case that we might not be able to do string concatenation, but there's a way that we could do it. So we could introduce a new function which combines an array of literals, basically the implode function, but one which is a bit more aware of it. And this is what you would end up having to do. You build up an array. In this case, it's the SQL array. I've put in a condition here to show how the SQL string could be conditionally set up. Parameters continues to remain separate, and then would have a literal implode function where it will take the glue first and then your array of literals second. And as that runs, it could do all the checking to make sure that everything's passed in as literals, and then it will come back and say, yeah, this can be kept as a literal and it's still safe, and therefore you carry on as before. It's a way of bringing in concatenation without affecting the everyday concatenation that the programming language itself has to do thousands of times every script run. If we can do concatenation, there's the question of every function should never pass through the literal flag. It should always switch it off. But the wherein clause may create the one exception, which is the array fill and the implode bit. That's the one we talked about of building up an array and then imploding it down. That might be the exception. Every other function should drop it. It should say, no, we're not going to keep this flag to say that's a literal. But it's sort of saying, can functions pass this through? The reality is nearly none of them can, apart from those 2. But again, it's down to the implementation of PHP in particular. Also, literal, could it be a better name? Some of the names that have been suggested is like safe string, or safe variable, or something along those lines. I only use the word literal because that's what they are referred to in the PHP language itself, as in the PHP internals guys or girls, they all know it as a literal. So that's why I've kept the naming that way. There may be other names for it. And the other one would actually probably require a bit more of a change for some developers. And that's variables which come from configuration files and things, like if you've got like a table prefix or something, if that value has been stored in an INI file or JSON or a YAML file, that file is reading a value from who knows. And you might have to look at different ways of implementing this so that it is clearly a literal that has been defined in the PHP script itself. Or alternatively, your database abstraction might just sort of go, oh, I will do a string replace at the last moment. You know, it'll do everything up until that point. There'll be a placeholder for that variable. It checks that it's a literal just before the end, and then it does the final bit. Again, it's just, that's like a question mark on how we would do it. It's not to say you can't be done. It clearly can. And then we talk about the future. The PHP internal functions could then start using this. So that whenever it receives an SQL string through the MySQL query function, Perl regular expressions, preg, they shouldn't, you know, the first argument, which is the regular expression itself, should not come from user data. It's dangerous. An exec, you know, which is where you have your running the commands. All of these could theoretically be set up to always check that it's been given a safe literal. And, you know, I say it's a future thing. Once we've got the basics in place, we could look at sort of saying to PHP, do you want to start throwing exceptions? Because the point is that most developers don't know when they're making a mistake, and we want them to be notified by the language teaching them. So as soon as they start running MySQL iQuery, the PHP language should be telling them without any abstractions. I'm starting with abstraction because it's easy, but in the future, the language itself could start blocking these. And likewise, when you're printing the strings. So if you're building a web page, you'll be sending HTML to the browser. Now, PHP could block that with a single exception for your HTML templating engine. Now, in terms of the actual implementation for that particular setup, the templating engine could create a specific value object, which is sort of like a way of saying, this is safe. I have built this. It is good. And then you pass that to PHP to print, as in to send to the browser. And therefore, PHP will be able to check that only those value objects are printed and sent to the browser, and you're not still doing prints here, there, and everywhere with your unsafe stuff and sending all sorts of rubbish to the browser, which could have problems. So these are very much once we've got the basic principle in place, how we can use this as a building block in the future to start pushing this so that the developers who are brand new, who aren't using any frameworks at all, how could they be protected? And this would probably be a setting that you could switch off for those people who think that they know better than they do. Inevitably they're wrong, but hey ho. But, you know, because mistakes happen. You know, I've been programming for too long, 20 years. And even now I sort of go back and occasionally I just see an example where I've echoed something or printed something and I forgot to HTML encode it. So there, and that's basically it. I've got an RFC, which is, this is like the PHP internals thing, which is like more of the technical way of doing it. And this is my justification document, which is basically this talk, but in sort of like description. So here's the examples again. This is my favorite section, is the thing of common mistakes, why people think that they're much better than they actually are. You know, obviously you've got the classic one where you haven't encoded at all. This one that I forgot to put a quote mark around it. That's the end of the PHP string, not the actual HTML. So you could have that. Here's the image source. Again, hasn't been, which one was that? oh yeah, sorry, HTML entities by default, I forgot this, doesn't encode single quotes by default, which is a real, like, oh God, okay. So fortunately, I've managed to get that into PHP 8.2. So that's changing in the next version of PHP because I made a mistake. I forgot that single quotes aren't encoded, which is a problem. So yeah, JavaScript URLs. If you're doing a script tag in HTML, inline JavaScript, you shouldn't be doing this anyway, and that's why we have a content security policy. But you're doing add slashes because you're thinking, oh, I'm in a JavaScript context. But if you have a closed script tag in there, the browser is the one that actually determines, oh, I've ended the script tag. So it goes script var URL equals, oh, look, close script. OK, I've ended this JavaScript. And because the developer has no idea what they're doing, may be guilty of this myself, it goes into script mode, and now you've got a cross-site scripting vulnerability. And it's the thing of sort of templating engines that you're going to be your savior here. You, on a day-to-day basis, should not be doing this. You should not be escaping. You should not be building your own templating engine. You should do it to people who know what they're doing, and not doing inline JavaScript either. HTML entities are here. I haven't done URL encode. So if I had a name of A&B, or I put in John & Mary, as in John and Mary, because I haven't done URL encoding, it will be passed by the URL bit incorrectly. So you're breaking your data, you're losing information there. The talk about UTF-8 versus the classic ASCII kind of thing. And also, I don't know if everyone's come across UTF-7. That's a great one, especially with Internet Explorer 11. Here's Twig, SQL basic one, escape string, yeah, boring. Oh, MySQL has a really weird feature called no / escapes, which basically completely destroys escaping string mode. I don't know why anyone would enable this, but it's there. And if it was enabled, the escaping function has no idea about it. So it will continue to use / escapes, which the engine with this flag will just ignore. So yeah, great. Oh, and mail. If you're sending an email, PHP has the ability to send in arguments to the mail function, so you can specify the return address. There is actually no secure way of doing this from user data. You can't actually provide it because the escaping approach is broken because PHP already tries to escape it. And it just gets really complicated because basically what's happened here is the F flag is to say the from address. You put this in and you're thinking, well, it will quote it. Well, it's already been quoted. PHP puts the quotes around it. So anyway, sorry, it's a bugbear of mine. There is just no way of setting this safely. You have to validate it as a perfectly valid email address before you put it in. So you have to do your validation. And we all know how easy it is to validate email addresses. No. Okay, so yes, so that's it. So plan and go implementation, how it works. Yeah, so that's all of that. And the order by, wherein some of the examples of where CLI injection could happen. This is an example of how you could theoretically do command line type of stuff. So you start off with your literal, which is the safe bit, and it would be checked that that's the literal. And then you use parameters for your arguments for your commands. Obviously, this is a bit of a contrived example, but the point is that there are times when you need to pass things into an argument. HTML templating systems, you could have your little snippet here where you have your arguments passed in. And in this case, the templating engine knows that this first one is a URL, it's a href, and therefore it can validate that it is actually a proper URL before doing anything further. So you don't have any JavaScript URLs put into it. Because the templating engine knows about the structure of HTML, it knows what a browser does. It means that you as a developer don't have to think about it anymore. And as long as that first bit is always a safe literal string, the templating engine can do all the work and magic to solve that problem. I thought I'd go a little bit mad and create a more complicated one, which is using XPath. So you could have like a really big document. And there's loads of other ways of doing it. It's just I was having a bit of fun with this one, really. So yeah, I've been rambling a bit now. And I'm sort of wondering, so if I just close this, stop sharing. Yeah, I wonder what you think. And if you've got any ideas or concerns or ideas or how you could use it or not use it. Yeah. Oh, yes, start my video. Yes, sorry about that. So yeah.
I had an observation.
Okay.
I think it's great, Craig, because so many times in our dev teams, we put barriers in the way of developers. And, you know, you must have this knowledge before you can do stuff. And anything that, how do I put it, directs them away from making horrible mistakes in a language is great to me, because it lowers the barrier to actually doing stuff, if I put it that way.
Yeah.
Did that make sense? So
yes,
I like
yeah.
it. I like it.
Yeah, I basically want it to be so that when the developer, as soon as they write it, that programming language can go, no, we're not doing this. And they can immediately go, oh, why is that not working? And then they're immediately directed down to how to do it, rather than 5 years later realizing that they've been putting holes everywhere, and now they're going to have to go back over everything and fix it all. It's much easier to identify these problems right at the beginning when you're coding, and you fix it as you are thinking about it. And yeah, I'm just sort of hoping that, yeah. So I don't know. I think it could work. So I think the main concerns that people have is the passing in table names and field names, which I think I've already addressed, and the wherein clause, which is the variable number of question marks, and potentially if you needed a variable that is like the table prefix, which I think you can do it, and I do it myself. Admittedly, my projects are a little bit more simple. It's not like, so I just define the constant in a config file rather than an INI file. And it's just that one that I have. So yeah. Yeah, so I'm kind of curious to think if anyone can find any problems with it.
I think if we put it on Twitter, then that's going to be sorted out. There are going to be many answers.
Yes, I have tried. And so far, admittedly, I don't have a big audience. So I've got about 200 people, most of which are bots. So they don't exactly respond. So trying to find the big audience would be fine. But I've talked to quite a few people and no one can really come up with anything. What usually happens, I end up sending an email to them about their particular, so they'll raise a concern, I would respond. I don't even get a response back because I think I've answered it. And I sometimes wonder if developers like to feel like they know, or they want to prove you wrong, but as soon as it's sort of like, yeah, I agree with you, it's like, whatever. Anyway, sorry, mini grudge. But I've been sort of redoing so originally I used to think taint checking was the solution. And that's why I installed the extension from Zeshin, I've forgotten his second name, Hui, and it worked, but it was buggy. Buggy in the sense that, you would have a variable and suddenly it'll become 10 times longer than it should be because it repeated a string, because it just is an extension that just doesn't have as much love as, let's say, if it'd been part of the PHP core thing. And I also found problems where I hadn't escaped things properly. You know, I'd escaped them, it passed the check, but it had actually let something through. Fortunately, I found it before it went live, but I've seen it in other projects because I do a lot of jumping around different projects and seeing what other people do because it's just good to see. And I do a bit of freelance work, and so I've seen a lot of code and I've seen a lot of mistakes over the years. And I've finally I think I've settled on this as the solution. You have to be very explicitly stating this string is safe, everything else is not. You know, as in it came from an external source, and therefore you have to take it very much along those lines. And escaping has to stop. The only people that can escape are those who are really well qualified, as in they are the ones creating the HTML templating engine, or they're the ones that are creating your ORM. Your day-to-day programmer, the day-to-day stuff you do all the time, should not have to think about escaping at all, because there will be mistakes. I think PHP is quite an easy one to pick on, but I'm sort of wondering if you, because you know you're a bit more on the Microsofty side, I wonder if they've got any better solutions. But I'm just sort of going down, right, this is going to have to be the hard rule now. This is the level we need to work at. So yeah, sorry, I'm rambling again.
I might not go so far as to claim it's a better solution. I had a little look actually. It appears Microsoft have a bunch of piecemeal things, none of which probably solve the problem. So there is a thing inside code analysis for SQL injection vulnerabilities. And there is a completely different thing inside ASP.NET MVC, where outgoing text going to the browser is automatically HTML encoded.
Okay.
Neither of which are complete solutions, and they are two different problems. So I think the Microsoft world at the moment is it's completely piecemeal.
Yeah, but if memory serves, sorry, it's been a long time since I've looked at ASP, so I apologize. But when it first came about, the sending of data was often, it came from like the IE rendering engine. You know, there'll be like very much a WYSIWYG editor, and sort of the combining of things. And I don't know how that's developed. Originally, it was very similar to PHP's method of basically you give it the values in line. And I don't know how good its ability is to understand how do you actually escape depending on the context. So if I was to give you a value for the href, the link bit, what would it do with a JavaScript URL? And I don't know what yours.
My first guess is it will toss it straight at the browser.
Okay, yeah.
That's
so
my first guess.
Yeah. So it will do the HTML encoding, but it won't notice the fact that it's in a URL context.
Okay, I might have to qualify what I said earlier. I think it probably I'm reasonably sure it knows at least for the Razor templating engine, that it knows the difference between stuff that's basically going straight in front of the user's face, and stuff which is a value being presented to an attribute somewhere. And I think it probably only HTML encodes the stuff that's, quote, going straight in the user's face. But
okay,
to be honest, I'd have to look at some documentation or even try experimenting.
I suppose the thing is, that is actually the HTML templating engine, and it could be updated to, if it isn't already doing this, it could already be doing the checks. It might have the understanding of the HTML structure. It might already have the understanding of how the browser is going to interpret it. And and that's great. I wonder, you know, how do you provide the HTML to it? Do you provide a text file, or, you know, in the examples I was giving, you've got Twig, which is one of the PHP's more popular ones, where you can say, get your HTML from this static HTML file. And that's fine because that hasn't been affected by user input, or it shouldn't have been. If you are, then, well, I'm sorry, there's only so much we can protect. You know, if you're going to allow the evil person to write your HTML, then you've got bigger troubles. But anyway, the other one is the snippets. So those the short little bits of strings, which is what I was trying to show in there. For example, if you needed to make, if you wanted to provide something to that HTML engine, which is HTML, being able to sort of say, look, this bit is safe, you can take it as HTML and trust it, and you can prove it. Because in this case, the is literal check would go, well, it was actually still is a string, but it was defined within the programming code. And therefore it could take that string, which it knows to be safe, and then work with it and go, yeah, I trust it. And I think it's that, you know, taking, I don't know what, again, I don't know ASP enough, but if it was taking the HTML from a static file, good, brilliant, I'm happy, good, all okay. But if you are taking those little bits of HTML as a string and passing it over to it, how can it be sure that it's safe? And I don't know if it has that.
I would say it doesn't. I think it is still fairly firmly in the developer's lap.
Mm-hmm.
I think it defaults to what I would call fairly safe.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you pick a string out of the database, you don't really know what's inside it. It was definitely not a literal.
Yes.
However, you probably want to display it on a web page, so it becomes an insertion snippet. Now, the ASP.NET, at least ASP.NET Core and similar processing engine, would HTML encode that on the way out to the browser. So if when somebody originally typed in the page in the, I don't know, surname field, they put less than H1 greater than, you can see where I'm going with this.
Yep.
Then that would be HTML coded when it went out to the browser rather than honoured, and the same would be true with the script tag.
Yeah.
So it's sort of semi-safe by default, but I think it's still firmly in the developer's lap. And there is a recipe in the what's it called, CSHTML file, which allows you, where you want to, and of course sometimes you need to turn off that encoding, because there are, as we all know, there are times when you need to do it. Maybe not that often, and ideally only with careful forethought, but there are times you end up needing to do this. So I'm kind of in favour of the safe by default approach, and you're getting a bit further to what I would call safe by design.
Yeah, because I think, you know, once you've got that very defined thing of saying, look, this is safe, this is, we don't know. I'm not saying it's explicitly unsafe, but let's assume that it's not. Then I think we can start drawing some lines as to, you know, we put some stuff on one side which we can trust, the HTML strings, the SQL strings, the command line stuff, the Perl reg expressions or whatever. As long as that's been created by the programmer, we're good. And then everything else is kept separate, parameterized queries, variables which go to your templating engine. And then it's down to those respective engines to actually do the work. I like SQL's one because the database can receive it in 2 packets or 2 messages. First of all, you send the SQL, it creates the SQL execution plan before it's received any data from the user. That means it is not possible. There is just no way the user data could possibly influence that. And I like that. It's just really nice and clean, but we need to enforce it. We need to make sure that the SQL that it receives is safe, it's trusted, that the developer was the one who created it. And we're not going to have any SQL escaping stuff, but it's just too dangerous. It goes wrong, as I've tried to show. So yeah, I think yeah, I don't know if you've got any other thoughts.
You mentioned templating engines. I mean, I am interested in the. You might need to run this past me because probably how PHP works is a bit different to ASP.NET. So if I do pull a value out of the, I mean, yeah, okay, let's suppose I want to do something like I pull out of the database a title, a name, and a surname, and I want to turn that into Mr. Richard Howells as a string, because that's what I put on the screen. How am I going to go about doing that? Because I'm clearly getting three things that are not literals.
Yes. So if you're going to be doing that, what you'll do is you'll create your HTML template first, which probably would be a paragraph tag. You might have your body tag, your HTML tag, and all that around it. You send that to the templating engine saying, look, even you know that this is safe because it's a literal. But in there, you've put some question marks or some other way of sort of saying, there will be values that will be provided to you in a moment. The next thing I'm going to do is give you those things. So the templating engine can take that and do all the work and understand the document. And then you separately provide those three values, the name, the title, the surname. And then the templating engine can look over it and go, well, I'm putting those inside the paragraph tag. So that's just simple HTML encoding. That's just simply the less than sign, the greater than sign, the ampersand, the single quote, and the double quote, and we're done. But if you'd put that one of those variables inside an a href, then it might go, oh, hang on a minute. That's I'm gonna have to go a little bit further now. I'm gonna have to make sure that what you're providing me is now something which is safe, which is a URL, not a JavaScript snippet. You know, if you were to give me JavaScript : evil code, the templating engine should go, oh no, I'm not having that. And it's down to the templating engine with the domain knowledge. It has to know, you know, it's its job. You know, its job is to create HTML, so it knows HTML inside and out, and therefore it knows which attributes are dangerous, which ones can just be passed in, which it also knows that attributes should be quoted. Sorry, that's my own personal thing. You can do HTML without attributes. I just think you're being lazy. And it goes wrong if you don't. Or it can go wrong. There is a way, but I'm not going to tell you. Because I think, yeah, you shouldn't do that one. So yeah, the templating engine should take those values and it should know how to combine them so that it is the one that sends the HTML complete to the browser. And then you've got a very clear line as to who does what. It means your developer builds the HTML string as a literal, and the developer should not be putting values into that and can't, you know, with this check. And then it's up to the HTML engine and it's their responsibility to do the actual work and combining and understanding and stuff like that. And then it's down to the programming language to only accept values that have come from the HTML engine rather than the rest of your code. So basically it kills off the print statement in effect, you know, unless you, and obviously you might, you know, in your developer mode, you might go, no, seriously, I just need to see what it's printing. But, you know, it's there. Once you've got those lines defined, you can then start working within them. And then it becomes a lot clearer. You know, it becomes so much more obvious as to these variables are safe, these are probably not. And so I think SQL is an easier one to explain because we've got parameterized queries and everyone knows how that works. Oh, the people
yeah, just none of them use it though, but you are right.
Yeah. So yeah, just trying to think if there's anything else there. I think the biggest concern that people have is performance, because if you were to do this with concatenization of literals, the PHP in particular, it does concatenating all the time. It's a language built around strings. All the variables are effectively strings. And I know they're trying to pretend that they're, you have integers and floating points, you've got objects nowadays, but ultimately it's about strings. It's a language built for web pages. And it does a lot of concatenating. There are, your typical script will probably run a few thousand, probably even a few million of those, which if you are always at every point saying, I'm about to concatenate these two things, are they both literals so that I can keep that flag on, or is one of them not, therefore it drops it? And if every function, it's that bit of what the performance impact is. Now, I've had one developer from sort of internals, he's been playing around with it, and his solution was, well, actually, we'll do it so that when concatenating strings normally, we will just drop that flag. And I'm sort of doing that, and then he said, well, what you do instead is you build up an array, or you make yourself a query builder that accepts literals. And then if it's the array approach, then you have just another function. It's a second function. So one to check it, and one which is about combining it in a safe way. So that means that the developers, for the few times you actually need to concatenate things together, will have to use that slightly different way of doing things, of just saying, look, this concatenating just needs a little bit more time for you to check it. We are talking nanoseconds here just for that, but obviously the point is nanoseconds over thousands of concatenations is a problem. So you only do the concatenation.
I can't get that. I mean, okay, I can't get that excited about a runtime performance cost. In the things that you've been talking about, because if it did one IO, then you're dead by comparison. And your solution or your approach doesn't seem to require any extra IO. So, okay, I can't say strictly I don't care about it, but in the global scheme of things, I don't care about it.
Yeah, I'm on the similar page. I'm sort of going, the benefits to this are far exceeded whatever negatives there might be, but
going to exceed the reputational damage of having porn all over my homepage and three developers in for a week trying to make my system safe before I can put it live again. So
exactly, but I do also have to recognize that I have to get this into the core language, and I need to show to people, can we do, so what I'm thinking is maybe there's actually, the first phase is actually 2 steps. There's 2 minor ones. First one is we create the one which has no performance impact at all. Because then you're tricking them and you go, we'll put this in. And the performance impact is only when you specifically go out your way to call the function to concatenate them in this particular way. And the second step, which comes up pretty quickly, is when people start using it and going, oh, look, this is great, but it's annoying to use this extra function. It's because I need to rewrite some of these things. And then you can go back to the core developers and say, there's a lot of people here who would actually be fine with this. Because unfortunately, a lot of the PHP core developers don't actually write PHP themselves, as in, their day-to-day, they understand the principles and things, and they've got a lot of, they do a lot of really clever stuff, but the actual building of websites on a regular basis is probably not their priority, for good reason. But yeah, it's the performance thing is where I'm sort of working with it and seeing how we can sort of slide in to get people aware of it.
If it's a real, genuine literal, I mean, okay, I'm not a compiler author, but if I were to pretend to be a compiler author, a compiler ought to be able to track whether this thing came from a literal. And that is exactly what Microsoft's CA3001, because I have it open on this screen here,
okay,
warning about SQL injection vulnerabilities does. But that is C#, which is, I mean, I don't know enough about PHP. C# is at least a compiled language. It isn't compiled to machine code, but it goes through this process, which clearly understands the difference between things which are literals, things which are derived from literals, and a whole bunch of other things. So they introduced into into C#, for example. And again, I have no idea whether they have the equivalent in PHP, but one of the things that developers easily run into in C# is mistakenly using an unset reference variable, and you get the famous null reference exception.
Yeah.
And the compiler now, you have to turn it on because it's too unwise to just blanketly turn it on in all code. But if you turn it on, the compiler now allows you to explicitly mark this is a reference which is allowed to be null. And the default is they're not allowed to be null.
Yeah.
And the compiler will track that. So if it gets in something it was promised is not null, you move it into another variable. Okay, the promise moved. And this is entirely a compile time check. It has 0 runtime overhead.
Oh, nice. Well, yeah. So PHP is a little bit different because what it does is it's a language that's written in C, which is my least favorite language because I think you can make so many mistakes with that. But anyway.
Oh, yeah.
With great power comes great responsibility, Craig.
Yes, but here's a gun, here's my foot. You know, it's very powerful, and I grant you. And for what it does, it's really good. But the typical programmer should not be writing in it.
I sort of agree. One of the things I was thinking of earlier when you were talking about this is we are moving to safe libraries in C. I mean, we have been doing it for years and years and years, which is more restrictive. So I think that's where I was coming from earlier. You know, more restrictive languages actually lower the bar to people coming in and actually doing something productive. Whereas if we fill them with, they need arcane training first of all, and then they're allowed to do stuff. You know, that's not a modern thing. Yeah. So, but anyway, I digress. Yes, sorry.
No,
the jibe against C.
No, I think it's very good. For example, if you want to get it down to like programs which run on microcontrollers and you know, different low-level stuff, it's really good and it's fast. It really is quick and powerful. You know, you are in the processor. You know what's going on. But my view is that the people who should be writing C should be qualified. I think they should. I think they should have to go on a training course, qualifications here and there.
Have you seen some of the C training courses?
Yeah, okay, maybe a new version. But you know, trying to push it that way because most people just want to get their job done. They just want to process a bit of code, a bit of data, and they don't need C. Heck,
I mean, I can definitely tell you over the years, because I've been in training for a long time, and you used to see on a C training course, people come along, oh yeah, I'm building an account system. And then after a while, you stopped seeing those people. You started seeing them on the C++ courses. And on the C courses, you saw people say, oh, I'm building an automatic brake system. And at the end of the week, I'm thinking, I wish you were making a coffee machine.
Yeah.
So, and now it's moved on. So the place I used to teach C for, they don't offer C courses anymore. And the market for C++ has pretty much disappeared, and Java came along as a language where we don't trust the programmers with pointers because we know programmers can't be trusted with pointers. Same is true with C#, exact same kind of heritage. So there is this trading up, and nowadays, I mean, I've done a bit of Arduino programming, and you don't get a smaller system than that. But you write your program using G++, a full-blown proper compiler. You compile it on your laptop like I have in front of me, and then you send 50 bytes of object code down to your Arduino, because you certainly can't compile it on that thing.
No. So have you come across Rust before?
The name, yes. And I went to a user group meeting where the guy talked about Rust, but no more than that.
From my understanding is that it should be like a memory safe. It tries to cover a lot of the the risks with it, and I know that the browsers are starting to look at this because web browsers are big, complicated beasts. I don't know if you ever tried compiling one of them, but goodbye your afternoon. Goodbye to your afternoon is basically the summary there. I compiled Google Chrome once, and that was interesting, but it's huge, and with any huge project, they frequently have problems. You know, this is where you have your software updates, where I don't know if you notice, but every week or two you have a software update. Yes, there are new features coming in, but there's also a lot of, oh, we messed this bit up, we forgot about this, there's this memory buffer overflow here and there and that. And Firefox is starting to use Rust as a memory safe language to basically try and avoid a lot of those issues, because it does that checking as it goes along, as it compiles. Now, for me, with the PHP one, we can't do it at compile time because of the wherein problem. But you know, I think it's just trying to find ways to stop mistakes being made, and we all make mistakes all too frequently.
No.
Perfect. Never crossed my mind.
No, you're right. The same thing is happening in the C++ world. As Christoph has said on lots of occasions that inside C++ there is a smaller, simpler, safer language trying to get out. And there is some serious progress in that direction over the last couple of years, with a thing called the Guideline Support Library, which, you know, we're not going to give up. We're not going to give up our variables with stars. People will still have pointers, but the idea is it allows you to document much more clearly your intent with this pointer. This pointer owns something. Okay, if this pointer owns something, then you're allowed to call delete against it to get rid of it. Memory management is still in the programmer's lap. It doesn't automate it. It doesn't fully automate that. But it does allow the compiler to check it, because if you have a non-owning pointer, it won't allow you to call delete on it. But it does put it into the programmer's lap quite a bit, in that you still have to opt into using these things. So it's not quite safe by design yet, but we are getting closer.
No, that does sound promising.
Yeah, I mean, I might foresee, possibly not in my lifetime, but maybe the lifetime of some younger programmers, that you might have to turn an option in the compiler to actually use a genuinely raw pointer, as opposed to one which is wrapped in some kind of safety net. And I don't see any problem with that. I think that's a good thing. If I want to opt into the dangerous stuff, I can do.
Yes.
C# has something similar. If you go into what's known as an unsafe block, you can declare variables with stars by them that are genuine pointers, and you're allowed access to raw memory addresses. And the fact that you have to be in an unsafe block tells you how desirable it is. And I have
Here's the clue.
I've never professionally coded an unsafe block, because it just isn't any need in normal application development.
Yeah,
I suspect Microsoft put it into the language to widen the range of things that they didn't have to use C++ for.
Yeah. Well, ideally, if you get to the point where you are having to fill this out, and if you're basically having to make the developer type in, I know what I'm doing, but I'm also being very stupid, or I know this is unsafe, you are clearly sort of getting them to sort of acknowledge the fact that they are doing something wrong. So yeah, I really want it to be that way round, of the programmer should be able to just write code and be fairly confident that at least these security parts of it are dealt with. I know we're not going to get everything. OWASP top 10 exists for a reason. But I think we can at least knock off injection vulnerabilities. Okay, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but I need to, let's say this is the reason why we got this proposal. It sounds like you can't come up with any problems with it, which is good.
No obvious ones.
Yeah. So, and if I can then start convincing the libraries to use it so that the database abstractions, they can start protecting themselves against these mistakes, then the developers who are using it will start being notified, and they'll learn from the fact that it will start complaining. Most ORMs they're often receiving a single string anyway, so they can pretty much enable it kind of straight away. Because it is just simply I'm collecting data from this table. You tell it the table as a single string. There we go, problem solved. And some of them will actually check the table exists. That's quite a nice little feature, or columns exist and all those things. But ultimately, they still need that ability to sort of turn around to them and say, the thing I have received is this way. And yeah. So I'm kind of glad you've not been able to pull it apart in straight away. That's good.
I think I don't know enough PHP again to give you input on that, but I think it's probably something that it sounds like we're all in agreement about, which is to give developers, and myself included, as many safety nets as possible.
Yeah.
Because ultimately we screw up with all the best intentions, and if you've got that in there, then it's just another thing. I was astonished to hear you talk about content security policy, because I can't believe how many places I see that just don't have something as simple as that in there. You know? So if we can't do that, then I think you should make it, as you say, as a mandatory part of your language, whatever language that is, to try and make it safe.
Do you know the thing that I upset a couple of fellow developers with is in Apache, you can say, if this header has not been set, then use this default. And what I've got is a rule which says if the content security policy doesn't exist, it will send one which is basically default none. So basically it says you're not going to load anything.
Yeah, just fries it.
Yeah, just sort of, so immediately that you've forgotten to put one on. And the other thing that I've found is because I made, rather than it just being you build the string yourself, and it can be a bit complicated to read and things, I've built a CSP Builder where you just simply, in the response, you're just simply saying, in the response, add this source to the image list. And by doing it that way, it means that developers, it's easier for them.
Django's got a very similar thing actually as well, which does, it's got it in there as a package. It's a I can't remember, CSP Builder package, and it's exactly that. It makes it as simple as possible, but still the use of it, or the lack of use of it, is of something which is there to help you. It seems to be ignored, and you touched on the older, the amount I've seen lots of CSPs with allow unsafe inline. It's like,
no.
And I've been out of the game, as I say, for 10 years. I'm a not so yummy mummy.
Have you come across trusted types?
No.
Okay, cool. It's fairly new. So, and it's an extension on top of CSP. So it's something you put in your CSP policy to say to the browser, I want to use trusted types. And I don't know, do you use much JavaScript?
Not massively, as I say. I've been what I've been getting back into is Python actually, and Django. So that's what my current. I've just looked at all of the current frameworks with horror, going, why is everything mixed together?
Yes. It's everywhere. But trusted types basically tells the browser to protect the unsafe APIs. So, in a HTML, that's an unsafe API. Not allowed it. Switch it off. Goodbye.
Very good.
If you want to set it, so you're building a link, so you say create element A, and then you should say set attribute href. Again, it's going to go no.
Okay.
Well, technically it does actually allow URLs, but if you put a JavaScript one in it, because the browser knows what it's doing, it's its own self, it'll go, I'm not accepting a JavaScript URL in that thing. And it basically, there's about 80 different syncs that they talk about. And if you switch it on, the trusted types, it's basically saying you go into this new higher state of protection, and the browser will make sure that the only things you use are the safe APIs.
Okay.
Now, it's called trusted types because there is one exception. And these are the things where you basically create an object where you can pass stuff in, but you have to provide a method which allows the browser to extract something it considers to be safe. And it means that you can then pass this object into the inner HTML function. And it basically allows you to package up something you know is safe and go off to there. So you would typically have your trusted type is a HTML sanitizer.
Yeah.
So DOM purifies, off the top of my head, is one of them. So that you would basically say to DOM purify, you are going to be my trusted type. I will give you all the HTML. You will filter it and make sure it's all good. And then you are allowed to use inner HTML, but nothing else is. And that's quite useful for like the WYSIWYG kind of editors. So for example, you've got a WYSIWYG editor and you want to inject that into the page. It means you have to pass it through DOM HTML, DOM purify before it can accept it. So enabling that. Now, I would love it if browsers enabled this by default.
Yeah.
But nothing would work anymore.
Oh, everything. My website would.
Okay, well, that's a good start. So you now get all the traffic on the internet because it's the only thing that works.
But yeah, it's so yeah, you got trusted types, you got content security policy, you got the feature policy, which is now being renamed to what's it called now? Permissions policy.
Yeah. Permissions,
although I wouldn't quite do it just yet because there's still some of the older browsers that still you understand feature policy, but they don't understand what permissions policy is yet. It's still rolling out.
I suppose the reason I highlighted it was because that was, back in my pomp in 2004, that's when it was first mooted as a thing. Let's have, and here we are, 16, 17 years later. And, I conceived just from a quick poke of assorted websites that, they ain't that good. Just in the basic tools, not in anything fancy, just it's surprising that the uptake hasn't been greater. That was it really.
Yeah. Have you seen
that's developer inertia, developer laziness, and management quite understandably not wanting to pay for it. I'd always rather you built another feature than you fixed a broken one.
Yes, that's true.
Have you seen Google's strict CSP version? It's basically is a simplified way of it. It's not perfect because it doesn't filter necessarily by source, but it means that they've basically created a CSP policy, which is a bit ugly. There's a reason for it, but what it means is as long as you include the nonce approach, which is not a pedophile, it's a random number. As long as you put that nonce on every single script tag, that script tag gets blessed, and therefore everything else it does from that point on is considered okay. It's not perfect, but it does mean that you are pushing away from unsafe inline JavaScript, which I think is the hardest part of all of this, because it's so easy to go, I just need a bit of JavaScript, I'll just stick it in the HTML. Sorry, you can't do that because the browser doesn't know if that's safe or not. You don't know if it came from the developer or not. So sorry, inline JavaScript's gone. But if you can get that bit done, then it becomes a lot simpler. And yes, they've obviously built it because Google, the amount of JavaScript they load from all sorts of CDNs and things, it's incredible. So they've obviously built a process which is allowing their properties to quite quickly put a content security policy on. in an easier way. I'm lucky because I don't have any dependencies. I build websites which are system stuff, taking data on forms, creating reports and that. So that means that I can be sure that all the JavaScript I need is in one folder. And I just say, you know, the a/js folder is where all the JavaScript lives. And I can tell you that in that folder is only static files, which are managed by my version control software. And the web server has no ability to write to that folder. So there is no way evil JavaScript can get in there. Well, that's my theory. And
there's always a way around it.
Yeah. Well, supply chain is the next one, isn't it? If someone compromises my computer and then they inject the JavaScript there.
From there, yeah. Which is that like what happened with Sunburst, wasn't it? That was exactly it. It's like, thanks very much.
So, but at the same time, whenever I
upload, we digress.
Yes. So yeah, I'm glad in a way that we at least have the tools nowadays. And I think it's down to frameworks to start enabling those tools by default. Did you get involved with the same site cookies thing? It's a little flag that goes onto a cookie to say, is this a same site cookie or is it a cross-site cookie? And
right, okay,
yeah. So it just means that if you are on a victim site if you're on a phishing site and that phishing site was to make a cross-site request forgery back to the target site and that person is still logged in, it means that that request will not include the cookies. Now, the great thing was, I was quite lucky because I was talking with Mike West, who was implementing it with Google, and we got it working on my site and we found out a few problems, we solved them and it's all good. But it meant that last year, or towards the end of last year, it got switched on by default. So cookies started becoming marked as same site by default. And it meant that kind of overnight, with very few people noticing, cross-site request forgeries were fixed-ish. It's not complete, it's not perfect, but it was quite an interesting drop in the ability to actually perform these attacks. Because most sites don't need to have requests coming from an evil site or a third-party site. And yeah, it broke a couple of things, but most sites didn't even notice. So I see some things that the developers of browsers are doing where they are enabling things and they are locking things down anyway. The latest ones being site isolation because of the whole Spectre and Meltdown kind of vulnerabilities. The idea being that websites really need to be in their own process. Because if they're a shared process, you could effectively have two tabs, one tab looking into the memory of the other tab. So the browsers are very much aware that they're going to have to move to a single process per tab, which is going to be interesting to say the least. It's quite a big change. But you know, that's the direction things are going to have to go in, and things are going to break with that.
This is something that perhaps you guys can fill me in on, which is I noticed obviously that I've seen that there's web assemblies being suddenly appeared, and I was like, oh, what's this? And then I was like, oh, that could be a problem. Because then not only have you got all the people that program in JavaScript, then you've got WebAssembly, and that's everyone else can now have a go at it as well. And I wasn't sure how much WebAssembly was used in the wild at the moment, if it had much penetration. I just, as I say, I a very, very surface level looked at it and went, oh, cool, and then thought, oops.
Not much, fortunately. It is trying to solve a problem, which basically it's that thing of you need this sort of little virtual environment where you can process stuff at machine level kind of speeds. It's kind of C-ish, but with pretty much no ability to do anything wrong. Because the idea is you are receiving code from
the internet from this dodgy website.
Yeah.
No, you can't memory manage in that way. So it's very much a subset of those instructions. But it means that if you need to do something at high performance, you've got this. Basically, you say, here's this WebAssembly file, which contains all the code. You download it, you create up a virtual environment for it, you run the code in that, pretty much a machine on the CPU, and the JavaScript can talk to it. It can send little messages to it, and you can get responses back, but it's very much isolated.
Okay.
And the reality is that very few people need this.
Well, I came across it because there was a Python package called Pyodide, which is the science side of it, and that's where it was running in WebAssembly, and that was kind of my what's WebAssembly? Is
if you're dealing with lots of data, definitely very useful. I'm just trying to think what else it could be used for. It's one of those things where I'm sort of going, oh, that's interesting. What would I use it for?
I think it's going to power other things.
Games.
Games maybe, but Microsoft have a bit of technology which uses this. It's called Blazor, and it is a way of doing client-side programming in C#. So you don't get to learn another language, but instead of spitting out the intermediate language that would run on a server or a Windows workstation or similar, it spits out WebAssembly.
Okay.
So essentially, it's, well, if we start off from a statement which is untrue, but let's start off with it, that JavaScript is the assembly language of the web, because lots of things, TypeScript, for example, will build to JavaScript. There are other things that will target JavaScript. And why? Because of running any browser. What's the downside? It means the browser has to reinterpret this text and do other crap to it before it can run it. And WebAssembly essentially just bypasses that. Not all, you're quite right, Craig. Bypasses some of those slow steps of deciding what am I supposed to do with this massive great lump of text I've been given. So the massive great lump of text becomes smaller and is better targeted, because essentially it's a bit like Java bytecode. So I think it will come by supporting other things. I think other languages will start to target WebAssembly because you can rely on it being there, and it's not JavaScript.
Yeah, I think that's it. So to bring people that aren't traditional sort of web developers into the fold, isn't it? It's like, there we go. You can now do it in the browser.
Well,
and
not only can I now do it in the browser, I can integrate it with my server-side code. Because if I'm a C# developer, I don't want to have to recreate a JavaScript thing that matches the JSON object that I'm passing from one side to another. I'd like to just receive it as a C# object.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought about that as an advantage. Yeah, as an advantage, it's like it's just going to be one language all the way through. You're quite right. Yeah. So, sorry, Craig, gone off on one again.
No, it's the whole evening. The whole evening's about tangents. Because whenever I'm doing my performance work, because I always like to make the systems quick. First of all, you're waiting for the network. That's always slow. But the next bit is waiting for the JavaScript to pass. And if you've got too much JavaScript, that's a few milliseconds there. And I know it's milliseconds and all that, but you add that up, and especially on a mobile phone, which may be a little bit running low on resources or busy doing something else, it all adds up. So, being able to provide an easier to pass thing is great. I would still say only use it when you know you need to use it, because I still quite like having JavaScript.
Or if you could just click something and have it done by default.
Yes. But ultimately, the WebAssembly doesn't have direct access to the DOM. So if you are doing interface work, you're better sticking with the JavaScript. I never really got onto the whole JavaScript frameworks thing. I'm a bit more of the classic web developer where I want the browser to ask for a web page and I deliver a web page. And it's a page there with all the data that you need straight away. And maybe there's some JavaScript to make it a little bit easier. Maybe a bit of JavaScript to hide something, or you can click this button and it will pre-fill something. Or you've got a page which is for, on one of the sites I've got is for marking where assessment centres are. So you type in the address of the assessment centre, and I've just included Google Maps. I don't put it on the page, I don't trust them. I put in an iframe, which is isolated, and that allows you to see the dot where basically you provide the address into the iframe, Google Maps receives it, puts the thing, and it's close enough, but it means the assessor can then drag that dot to the proper location, you know, saying the door is here on the building, and I get back the latitude and longitude, which gets stored into a field, which is a lot better. But it was a bit of JavaScript which made things better, but wasn't necessarily required. It didn't have to be there. Because the alternative is you save it and I just take the postcode, send that to Google's API, and they come back with a very rough latitude and longitude. It's close enough. And, you know, but then again, I've been building websites for too long, and I know what happens when a JavaScript file fails to load because you're on a dodgy internet connection in the middle of Lincolnshire. Sorry. I used to work, so people would say, oh, you know, we've got fantastic internet now, you can rely, oh, you've got fantastic browsers now, you can rely on JavaScript. I'm going, have you ever been on a 2G connection in Horncastle, where it takes 30 seconds for the HTML to arrive, and it probably will give up by the time the JavaScript has got there.
Especially after you loaded that 64 megabyte image that's the logo at the top.
Oh, yes. Yep, seen that as well. Someone's taken a photograph on their camera in their nice high quality, and they've just uploaded it and thought, oh, make a thumbnail out of that by just setting the width and height really small as you look at it as it slowly loads.
Obviously, what width and height are for. I mean, anybody knows that.
Yeah.
Can I ask, do you guys meet up quite regularly as a OWASPBristol? Is it a common digital monthly or something?
Oh, Katie's probably the one to answer that one.
Katie suddenly heard OWASP mentioned.
Is Katie going to disappear, or shall I try?
No, that's Craig.
Okay. So yes, obviously the last year has been a bit of a disaster for obvious reasons. Katie's she's amazing. She organizes everything. I just tack along at the end. And I'm just nearly a name on the list. Katie has organized pretty much she has organized every meeting. She's got all the speakers and everything. I think, if memory serves, she aims for at least 4 a year. I think that's what OWASP ask of us, but there have been years where she's done a lot more. And you know, she organized everything, and I'm just trying to remember, is it every 2 or 3 months you've been sort of doing? You've been able
I was trying to do it like every 2 months on the third Thursday to kind of make it to make it manageable, to put it simply. And without August, because in normal times people are going off. People are on holiday, but these last years has not been normal times. But yeah, usually this is what I would do. Yeah.
So Katie, you started the group and grew it. I think I went to the first meet. Actually, I haven't been to most of them, but you know, Katie's sort of organised the venues, the speakers, kept everything going. And you know, without her, this just would not exist. I know, Katie, you've been a bit busy with work recently, and obviously pandemic also causing quite a problem. But yeah, it's been.
But yeah, just because at the moment it's just me and Craig doesn't mean that can be only us. I mean, ideally would like to have 3 chapter leaders. So yeah.
But no, Katie normally gets sort of people to come and do talks on things which you can do today. She's organised the competitions. So what's the name of the company that did it last time? The Secure Code Warrior. So they organised an event, but Katie organised an event with them, where basically a load of us members turned up and run their project, their sort of training course they give you a load of challenges, and if you get them right, you get points, and the person with the most points wins, in theory. And that one, so Katie started that, and it was a week-long event, so you didn't have to be there on the night. But previous years, you did do it once before, didn't you, where we were actually all in the Just Eat building, and we did it all in that night. Was it Just Eat?
Are you talking about challenges?
Yes, the
no,
challenge
that would
ones.
be the immersive labs, because they are in Bristol based.
No, we did 2 though, didn't we? We did one.
Oh, and another one in Just Eat with the Secure Code Warrior, yeah.
Oh, that was Secure Code Warrior as well, wasn't it? Yeah. And they're good fun. But it's also, sometimes it's like a couple of talks, but also the social side of things. Because I've not actually really seen any human beings properly for a while. Going a little bit strange. But yeah. So again, thank you very much, Katie, for everything you've done. So
yeah, thanks.
Well, guys, I am going to drop out actually, because I'm feeling the need for some food.
Good idea.
Thanks all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And if you've got any thoughts or anything, I think my contact details are fairly easily to find. So my next challenge is to actually convince the PHP developers to implement it. So yeah.
Yeah, you might find you have to become one to do that.
Yeah, it means I have to learn C properly rather than my my paltry understanding of it. So yeah, here we go. Well, thanks for turning up, and I think I probably should be going to eat as well. I don't know.
Thank you. Thanks for putting in the effort to actually do something, and thank you, Katie, for organising as well.
Thanks.